everyone. Sorry for the minor technical difficulty there in the beginning, but hopefully you can all hear me. My name is Cary and I'm here with Tessa. We will introduce ourselves in just a second. I want to make sure we have all of our webinar settings set up correctly, but if there's any issues, definitely let us know what's going on. Land use education and research. I run the geospatial training program at CLEAR. So my day-to-day activities focus on the use of geographic information system science, not only in our research and applications like the one that we'll be talking about today, but I also teach it. So I do a lot of short courses in GIS, GPS, online mapping, and that sort of thing. And I also help to maintain various statewide mapping websites, including the Aquaculture Mapping Atlas, of course, and Connecticut Environmental Conditions Online. So that's a little bit about me, and I will let Tessa now introduce herself.
Hi, and I'm Tessa Getchis. I'm an extension educator with Connecticut Sea Grant and UConn Extension. I work for the Aquaculture Extension program, and I work with producers and regulators in business development and permitting assistance. I also help in research areas, and we focus on species and gear development. And so today we're going to walk you through this new tool that we've developed. So basically what we'll do is give you a little bit of background on the shellfish resource in Connecticut. We'll talk about the aquaculture site selection process. Cary will review a little GIS. We'll provide you with a demo and of course answer any questions that you may have about the use of this tool. So in Connecticut, we're really interested in expanding both commercial and recreational harvest of our shellfish resources. And there is a need to improve the site selection process, and so Cary has been working with us for a few years along with our State Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Aquaculture to develop this tool that we're going to be previewing for you today. We have a lot of existing commercial and recreational activity in Long Island Sound. It's typically called the urban sea. We have a lot of aquaculture, but a number of other commercial uses. We have commercial harvest industry, a fishing industry. We have a lot of navigation, recreational uses, boating, sailing, and with that, we need to consider minimizing the use conflicts with aquaculture and these other activities. We also need to avoid any navigation hazards with other boaters and other activities and minimize the potential adverse environmental actions with interactions with aquaculture gear and the environment. So what we've done in the past is to use paper maps to go through the site selection process for aquaculture. And the problem with this is that we have so many different types of data, so many formats, so many sources, and overlaying all of these different maps is very cumbersome, it's time consuming, and it's quite outdated. And so what we've done is move to a GIS type system, which helps us to simplify looking at the data and overlaying different types of information. So back in 2008, we invited Cary in to train some of our local shellfish managers. They had asked us to provide them with desktop GIS training, and so we did so. Cary introduced them to a course. We trained 30 individuals from 10 different towns. But it ended up being a miserable failure. Would you say that's the case?
I would say there were certain technical challenges, not only technical challenges, some financial challenges, because desktop GIS typically isn't a free enterprise. So some of the commissions didn't have resources, funding to be able to purchase the system and then also train their employees on how to use it. So it being a complicated technology to begin with, we found it to be somewhat cumbersome for these folks to learn in 2 days and then to go back to their commissions and actually implement. So that was kind of our take home. I wouldn't say it was a colossal or total failure, but we did learn quite a bit from that process. One of the things that we discovered is and I would also say that around in 2008, this was sort of the beginning of a GIS revolution, I would call it, to sort of transition some of the mapping from the desktop environment, where software has to be installed and maintained on a computer, to the web environment or the cloud. And since then, since 2008, so much has changed in the world of GIS and web GIS. And it was at the end of that grant period where I was sort of just playing around with some of these new techniques and technologies that allowed us to take the data and some of the tools from the desktop environment and publish them to a website where people could then access the data in an interactive online environment that was free and open access to them and the public and their commissions, and access the same type of information with limited tool sets, so they didn't easily get overwhelmed, and it was obviously still GIS based, but they didn't need software installed, and they didn't really need very much training. So that was the beginning of this whole new wave, not only for the mapping atlas in its first version, but also just for GIS as a whole. And we've come a long way since 2008. So, of course, our target audience includes decision makers, that's industry and managers, and really anyone who wants to influence the process. So in doing so, and sort of transitioning from focus on desktop GIS to focus on cloud-based GIS, we're sort of reaching a broader audience, and we can also start to think about different end users that might be able to benefit from having this information free and public online. So just quickly, again, this is 2008 was what we call version 1 or V1 of the Atlas. This is, for any of you techies out there, built in what's called the Web ADF environment, which is no longer being supported really much in the web or web GIS world. It's outdated at this point. But at the time, it was revolutionary. This was really eye-opening. This was incredibly useful. And then we stuck with that for a few years, and then in 2011 we were able to get a little bit more funding to sort of give it a good facelift. The data behind it improved, and we were able to expand the amount of data included in it, and also the technology behind it, what's sort of driving it under the hood, if you will, is totally different as well. This is built on what's called the Flex API. So the interface has become much more user-friendly and easier to update. So in 2013, we sort of refreshed it again, and then last fall, I started working on the current version, or version 4, which is what we'll talk about today. Still built in the Flex environment, which has some pros and cons. One of the downsides is that it is reliant on the Adobe Flash, what do I want to call it, browser plugin. So many of you, if you go to the viewer and you haven't used it before, your web browser will ask you to install the plugin, which if any of you have an iPad or an iPhone, you might be familiar with Apple's resistance to browser plugins. So the long and short of it is the Atlas does not work on an iPad. So as we project out to the future, this might be something we take into consideration with future updates of the Atlas, but we'll see. The Atlas has a ton of data, and it's actually growing every year. We add to it. There's general data that sort of give us an overview of the sound, of water quality, and sort of base map layers. There's also of course, aquaculture areas, including lease areas, data sets that might be important, like marinas and moorings, and commercial and recreational shellfish areas. There's also a lot of environmental data layers, including endangered species, habitat information, and also just other useful information like coastal access sites, marinas, and that sort of thing. So where does the data in the mapper come from? That's a good question, and the answer is it comes from a variety of sources. Some of them are federal sources, some of them are state or municipal government entities. So they sort of come from a range of different places. The majority of the shellfish data comes from the Department of Agriculture Bureau of Aquaculture, and they are updated regularly. They do a fantastic job updating the data and providing it to me to then port into the Shellfish mapper.
And the towns also contribute a great deal of data for the recreational and commercial harvest areas.
That's true. Thank you. Like all things, there are limitations. So of course, the data going into the mapper is only as good as the data that we're able to obtain for the mapper. So there are things that you should always be aware of when you're using spatial data or really data of any type. So, you know, how accurate is it? How updated is it? And all that information is available in the metadata, which we link to. Also, data updates sometimes can be staggered, so they don't always get all updated at the same time. And some data just doesn't get updated at all. It's been created once, maybe it was digitized from a paper map and published in GIS format, but there are no plans to update it, or at least no plans at the time to update it. But what you should know from the public side of things is that the data, we do our absolute best to provide the most up-to-date data through the atlas as we possibly can. So just briefly, sort of a broad brush view of the functions and tools of the atlas, and then we'll really dig in when we get into the live demo. So there are, of course, dozens of coastal marine data sets in the mapper itself. You have the ability to search data layers and data tables or attribute tables. And you can do things like measure features, get the distance away. You know, if you're looking at a potential lease area, you can use the measure tool to determine the distance away from, let's say, a channel or a navigation buoy. You can do area measurements and also get the spatial latitude, longitude, location of a feature. You can import data. So if you are, I like to say a GIS person, and you maintain your own GIS data in your desktop environment, and you want to upload a shapefile to the mapper, you can now do that. So that's one of the relatively new updates of the mapper. And of course, you can do this and use your own data to overlay, compare, and visualize your data against what's provided for you in the atlas. And you can annotate the map. So you can add drawings or graphics or even text on top of the map and then save it and print it and take it with you to your planning meeting or whatever it is that you plan on using it for. We have a new tool which we will show you today called the Draw Lease Area tool or Gear Area tool, which is really nifty. And it's very helpful for those of you that are looking to submit an application for a new lease area. And of course, you can print and save maps. So we're going to go through a live demo, which is always exciting in these sorts of formats. So hopefully everything flows okay for you. If you have any questions or there's any issues, just type them into the question box as we go along. But just as a general rundown of what I'm going to show you, we will do a general overview of the atlas and its interface and the toolbars that are available to you. I'll talk and show you the base maps and some of the spatial data sets. And then we're going to run through a hypothetical siting of a new shellfish lease area. So we'll consider physical, environmental, and existing use interactions of different data sets. So we'll be turning on and off lots of different data sets. We'll be looking at classification areas. And then we'll run through sort of a mock use of the lease area tool that I just mentioned. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to hopefully minimize the PowerPoint. Give me a second as we open up the atlas. Okay, so hopefully you guys are all seeing, let me just expand my questions just in case anybody has any. Okay. So the URL for the Shellfish Mapper is clear3.uconn.edu/shellfish. We'll bring that up again at the end of the webinar, so don't worry if you didn't get that. But it's hopefully pretty easy to remember, and when you open up a web browser and go to the website, you'll see this. So it's just a greeting page. There's an About tab, so there's some more information. And you can contact us through the Contact Us button here, or also through the main toolbar. So I'm just going to click Get Started to open up the atlas. So some of you are probably familiar with this or familiar with other web-based mapping tools. It's sort of, many of them, most of them have that Google-like experience where, you can click and drag the map around. You can choose a base map. So up here at the top, if I hover over Choose Your Base Map, you can see there's a number of options of different base maps that you can select, from different imagery data sets to nautical charts, which come in handy when you're doing an application, to terrain maps and leaf-on and leaf-off imagery. So there are a lot of very helpful base maps here from the Choose Your Base Map drop-down menu. The toolbar, the main toolbar for all of the functions of the atlas, is located at the top. So as I hover over each of these tools, you sort of get a sense of what they do. We won't have time today to go through all of them, but just, I'm sure you guys will visit the site, or if you haven't already, and poke around some of those different tools. The layer list is really important. That's located over on the right side of the screen. Every toolbar, when it's opened, including the layer list, can be clicked on and sort of moved around your interface. So you can plop it down wherever you prefer it to be. I like it to sort of just sit over here. But just be aware that you can also expand it. So if I click down in the lower right corner, I can drag it, and so I can see all of my different layers, or I can sort of shrink it up. So you'll sort of figure out how to best situate your map to suit your needs as you start to use the mapper. Each of these are also expandable. So each layer, you can click on the little arrow to the left of the layer name, and it will expand it and also show, when the layer is turned on in the map, what the symbology of the features in that layer is. All right, so we're going to zoom to an area. In order to find a location on your map, you can either just use your zoom, your navigation tool. So over on the left side, you have sort of your standard zoom in, zoom out. You can use your hand to pan around the map, or you can sort of use any of these functions here. They're pretty standard web-based mapping tools. You can also enter an address in the address locator up here in the upper right corner if you have an address that you want to go to. The other helpful tool in the mapper is the Find Your Town tool. If I click on the little icon of Connecticut, a list of all the coastal towns will come up, and you can select the one that you want to zoom to, and it will automatically zoom to the full extent of that, the coastal extent of that town. And to close any toolbar, you can either minimize it and again move it around and just click on the icon to maximize it, or you can just close it by clicking the X. So here we are in the town of Stonington, which is where we're going to sort of go through our mock application for citing a new lease area. Before we get to that, I'm going to show you a couple things that have to do with the layer list. So let's look at a data set. I'll choose coastal access sites. I'm just going to check the box in the map layers window, and that will turn on that layer in the map. And again, I can click on the side arrow to expand the symbology. There's not much symbology for this particular layer. They're all symbolized the same way. But if there was another layer that had a lot of symbols, that would be useful. You can also view symbology from the legend. So if I click on the legend icon, any active data sets that are turned on in your map will appear in the view legend. So if I was to turn coastal access sites off, you can see it gets removed from the legend. So that can be helpful, especially if you have a lot of layers turned on. You can also click on a feature to identify it, which means it will search where you click and bring up information for the feature that you click on. And all this information is stored in a data table behind that data set. So when you're talking about GIS data, we often refer to this as the attribute table. The attribute table can also be viewed in the atlas by clicking on the small arrow at the bottom. It says click to expand the panel. You'll see the attribute table displayed in that panel. and you can click on any feature in this table and it will highlight it on the map, which is kind of a nice way to look at this information. You can also export attributes to a CSV file from the data table itself as well. Some people might find that useful. Okay, so I think at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it off to Tessa, and she'll take us through the process of considering and eliminating areas that may be unsuitable for aquaculture. Okay, so let me just set up the map for Tessa so she is ready to go. And I'm going to be driving the map while Tessa talks us through it. So hopefully we won't have too much dysfunction. Bear with us as we sort of do this process together.
And while Cary's setting that up, we should mention that today we have a diverse group that's participating in this call, so you may find that some of the tools are more sophisticated than you need, or there may be additional tools that we don't review today, but you're welcome to contact either of us to learn more about the tools that are built within this program for your specific use. Are we ready, Cary?
We are ready.
Okay, so what we're going to do right now is to go through a typical process that a grower might when determining what area might be suitable for aquaculture. So they might be interested in a particular town, and in this case we've zoomed in on Stonington. And we're going to go through a process of elimination. First, we're going to identify all of the areas where this person couldn't work. And so we might start with the commercial areas that are already existing. So what Cary's doing now is highlighting the commercial shellfish beds that are located in state and town waters. So those brown polygons that come up, those are all town beds that are already in use. And you see that she's selecting them, and you can find out what information is in the attribute file for each of those polygons. The pink polygons represent the shellfish beds that are in state waters. So again, those areas would not be potential for this new prospective grower. What we'd also like to do is to turn on the recreational beds. So those recreational beds are now identified by the hash mark polygons in green and blue. And so again, those are additional areas that we're taking off the table. No one could propose a new lease in those areas. We also need to consider environmental interactions. And so there are protected species and habitats, and those data sets are included in the menu here. So again, we're just going through one example. One of the areas that we need to avoid are eelgrass beds. And so Cary's selecting the most recent data for eelgrass. And what is shown on the map are different shades of green. The dark green being the high density eelgrass beds. The medium color or mid green is the medium density, and the light green is the low density. In Connecticut, there's a 100-foot setback required from any eelgrass bed. So you can't site your project or your lease near those areas. And so again, we'd have to take those areas off the map and then a 100-foot buffer around them. We also have what's called an environmental sensitivity index. And what we're doing right now is we're eliminating these areas is we're actually following the application process itself for aquaculture in Connecticut. So these areas are identified as areas to avoid in the application. And so Cary has now identified all of those environmental sensitivity index areas. Most of those are near to shore, and you can see the color symbology there. Most of them would not be considered aquaculture areas anyway. They're mostly land features. But if an aquaculturist were to site an aquaculture project, he might consider where he would land his product or do work on land. And so he or she may have to avoid those environmental sensitivity areas in terms of dockage or, again, landing product. Excuse me. We also need to consider use conflicts. And for there, we might look at navigational channels. We can look at the Coast Guard chart, and we've used that as a base map. It's a very busy map, and so what we're going to do is look at that in just a few minutes, layered on top of what you already see. Water depth is also on the navigational charts, and so that's important to look at. We also have soundings, so if you're not near a navigational channel, you can look at simply the soundings data, which is right here.
Probably takes a minute to load.
So Cary, if you could turn on those anchorage areas. We have a lot of mooring fields throughout the Sound, and mooring fields have to be avoided. And so those are additional areas where aquaculture can occur. So once we've eliminated all of these different areas where aquaculture can't occur, we start to think, where can it occur? We're not talking about biological productivity here. What we are talking about is where shellfish can safely be harvested from. And so the way we get at that is to look at shellfish classification areas. So the federal government, through its National Shellfish Sanitation Program, has established a shellfish classification system. Many of you are probably familiar with this. The State Bureau of Aquaculture manages the State Shellfish Sanitation Program, and the way that they designate these areas as to whether you can harvest from them or not is to collect water quality samples. And there are hundreds of stations throughout the Sound where they collect these samples. When they do this, they consider point and non-point sources of pollution, and there are extensive data sets for all of these areas. And so what Cary has just turned on is the shellfish classification polygon symbology. The areas in red are considered prohibited, so shellfish cannot be harvested from these areas for human consumption. There are areas that are different shades of green. Those areas are considered restricted, and there are different conditions on each of these restricted areas, but basically the state will allow growers to move product from those restricted areas to approved or conditionally approved areas for depuration or for purging of any bacteria contaminants. And there are, again, specific conditions that are in the metadata behind all of these different restricted areas. So there may be a limitation on the size of the product that can be moved from that area, the time of year that they can be moved, and how long that they have to remain in a depuration area before they are sold to the public. So that's important information for a grower to know. Many growers will move their product from a restricted area to a conditional area or an approved area before sale. And so that requires them to consider setting up a lease in one or more areas. So do we want to turn on now the navigation chart area? Sure.
So it will be hard to see with all these other layers turned on. So I'm going to toggle off that classification area.
Okay, so this is obviously a very busy chart. What we typically do is zoom in to identify where the federal navigation channels are. Again, this comes from the application for aquaculture. There is a required 1,000-foot setback from any federal navigation channel. And so if you're proposing a lease, you need to identify the nearest navigation channel, and on your map that you submit with your application, you have to show that distance from your lease site and your gear area to that navigation channel. If it's not applicable, then you don't have to include this particular map. But it is important to consider. Again, we're not looking at the area in terms of biological productivity. Most of these areas in Stonington have some sort of recreational commercial harvest. It's quite productive. But in other areas of the Sound, other parts of the country where we don't understand or know how biologically productive the area may be for shellfish aquaculture, there are other tools to get at that information. The atlas is simply a site selection process to understand those social and use conflicts and how to avoid them, and again, the environmental interactions. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to pass this back to Cary, and she's going to demonstrate a new tool that a prospective producer can use to draw a lease area and also potentially a gear area, and develop maps that you can print out and submit with your aquaculture application. Keep in mind that this tool is not only for growers, but also for resource managers or others who might want to review or comment on an application.
Thanks, Tessa. One thing I will point out, Tessa said the map is quite busy and difficult to look at times. If you know what you're looking at or what you're looking for, it that's one thing. If you turn all the layers on at once, you're clearly going to have a pretty ugly looking map. But one thing that does help at times when you're looking at a layer like the classification areas, which is a polygon layer with a fill, solid fill, you can use the transparency tool. So if you click on the small down arrow to the right of the name of any layer, you'll see this menu comes up, and transparency is one of the options. So you can actually use that slider bar to change the transparency so you can technically see through that layer to see layers underneath it or information below it. So that's just one tool tip that you might find useful as you start to use this atlas and find that layers are making your map a little overwhelming. Also notice you can move layers up or down in the layer list, so you can move layers on top or below other layers so that they draw in different, draw on top of another layer, so it's not getting shaded out or colored out. So hopefully that's a helpful tip. One other thing that I'll point out, down here at in the lower left-hand corner, I meant to mention this earlier, you'll see latitude, longitude values in decimal degrees and degrees, minutes, and seconds. And as you move your cursor around the main map area, you'll see that changes to reflect where your cursor is at any given point. And also you might find the measure tool down at the bottom helpful as well. Okay, so as Tessa mentioned, we are going to highlight our newest feature of the Atlas, which is the Draw, Lease, and Gear Area tool. This is brand new in the last few months of released in this version of the Atlas, and it's thanks to a colleague of mine, Aaron Nash, who has helped with the technical background programming that went into this tool, so I have to give him a shout out and credits for making this tool actually happen. It's been years and years, I think, of Tessa and other folks asking for this, so I'm really excited that we're able to bring it to you, and it is a work in progress, so all sorts of feedback is useful. So if I click on that icon, the Draw, Lease Area, Gear Area window will open up, and really this is again for someone who might be looking to submit a pre-application to the state for a new lease area. And in order to do that, you need to submit 2 different maps. So this tool has been created with those maps in mind. And folks typically will go out on the water and collect the location information for their potential lease area using a handheld GPS. So they'll come back with coordinates for where, sort of the markers for where that new lease area is going to be located. And this tool is set up so that they can then input those coordinates and display them on a map, and then print out a map that can be included in their lease application. So you can submit your information, your coordinate information, in either decimal degrees, degrees, minutes, and seconds, or degrees, decimal minutes. So depending on how your GPS is set up to collect information or how you prefer to store your information, you'll put those coordinates in to this tool in whatever format you choose. In order to save time, I actually am just going to copy and paste my coordinates. I have them in a Word document, so I'm just going to slide that over. Otherwise, I'd be sitting here and having a million typos, but bear with me. I'm going to copy. Oops, I have to do them one at a time. Sorry. Paste.
These are patient people, Cary.
I hope so. And so as you, again, you need an XY location for each of these, and I'm going to just paste that in and then press locate. And as you do that, your coordinates will appear on your map. So of course, in order to make a polygon, we need a few different coordinates. I have 4 here. So again, you ideally have this because you went out in the field and collected your real world coordinates. Sorry, I can't think and click at the same time. And again, locate. So there's my second vertice. one. I hope it's not painfully slow for you all on the other end here.
Yeah, get the negative in there.
Oh, thank you. I have some helpers, some little elves watching over me here.
And these coordinates can be scratched down on a piece of paper too. You don't have to have any fancy file. You just type them in.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, last one. Oops, well, I actually missed my third coordinate, but you'd get the point. It will create the shape on the screen for you. You can actually delete some of these if you make a mistake and go back and redo it. When you have your coordinates on your map on the screen and you're happy with it, you can click Finish Area, and that's going to create a polygon for you. Here you can choose your area type. Is it a lease area or a gear area? Likely you'll always have a lease area, but some of you might also be submitting an application to add gear to your lease area in the form of bags or cages. I'm not an aquaculture person, so I don't know what kind of gear that is, but you would also have to delineate the area where that gear is going to be. So this tool can be used for that as well. So I'm going to choose lease area, and you'll see it gets added to the map as a polygon shape. It also provides me with the exact acreage, which is really important. You need to submit that when you submit your application. And it's going to tell me what shellfish classification area it's in. So it's currently in an approved area. That's fantastic. And I just want to point out, you can export this feature so that you can import it into another session. So if you come back to the mapper tomorrow or next week or next month, if you've exported this data, you can just simply import it again, and you don't have to worry about entering all those coordinates all over again. Up at the top, if you click on the little print icon, this is going to help you with the figures, the two maps that you need to provide in the application packet. And in the application, they're referred to as Figure 1 and Figure 2, which is why we have called them Figure 1 and Figure 2 in this tool. So you would just fill out, this is all required information for the application, so it has an asterisk next to it. I'm not actually going to go through this whole thing, but you get the sense of what this is all about. After you've done Figure 1, you could select Figure 2 here and fill out the required information for Figure 2. When it comes to things like how far away are you from a federal channel, if you click on this little icon, it's going to open the measure tool, and you can click on Show Measurements. And what you can do here is then select your unit of measure and actually use the measure tools to create or to determine the actual linear distance from your shellfish lease area to whatever feature you're being asked or required to identify. So you need to identify how far away you are from the closest channel and the closest landmark, and so you can use those tools here. When you're ready, you can click Preview Your Map, and it should, I'm not sure if it's because it requires information, probably. Okay, so I thought it was going to let me preview my map, but basically what this will do is it will create a map output for you that you can then print directly to your printer, or you can save it to a PDF layer and save it to your computer and then print it later when you're ready to submit your application. So again, it doesn't get a whole lot easier for you. I'm sure it could get easier, but this is certainly a step in the right direction. There's a lot, it makes it a lot easier to create maps that you need to include in your application. And if you need some more information about how this works, there's a help guide built right into it. You click on that little I information window, and you can scroll through this, and it sort of takes you step by step on how to use the tool itself. So if I didn't do a good enough job, you have the information right here at hand. And of course, you can always contact us. Tessa is available to help any potential prospective growers with their applications. She's done that a lot in the past, and she's happy to continue to do that. So she's there for support as well. All right, is there anything else that we want to cover about the atlas in a live demo? We have about 18 minutes or so. We can come back to the atlas if someone has a specific question. I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint presentation again because we have a few extra slides.
And while Cary's doing that, feel free to type your questions in now, and as soon as we're done with the presentation, we'll start to address any questions you may have.
Absolutely. So Tessa, do you want to talk a little bit about some outcomes and impacts, since you sort of hear from folks about this and work with folks that are using it?
Sure. Well, we're quite excited about this tool because our regulators have adopted it. They're using it already to review applications for aquaculture. Our state aquaculture coordinator, who's based at the Bureau of Aquaculture, is promoting this to industry and encouraging them to use the atlas to develop, again, their maps along with their applications. So it is quite useful. As the maps improve, the review process improves. So there's not a lot of back and forth like there used to be when the maps were all hand-drawn. So it saves a lot of time if you use a program such as the Atlas or something comparable, even Google Maps, to develop your applications. But again, this is specifically developed with the permitting process in mind for Connecticut. So we encourage you to use it. It's been accessed by users in more than 18 states. It's been a model for other programs that have been developed in other states. And we've been working with other individuals to improve their site selection process. So Cary's really driven the bus there and been a great resource for us.
So just some acknowledgments that we've had a lot of help along the way, and we appreciate all your input and all your feedback. So keep that coming. I'm just going to put up our contact information and then we'll get to a question. I think we have one here. I don't know why I can't see it very well. Which API would you use if you could start over creating the atlas? Oh, that's a good question, because I certainly probably wouldn't be using the Flex API. Oops, no, that's my question. Oh. If I could do anything, I'd probably start with looking at ArcGIS Online and their templates. They have a lot of new tools now for sort of we had to do a lot of the coding from scratch, or it was difficult. It's taken a while, and at this point we don't have a lot of funding to keep it to spend a lot of time to start from scratch, so we sort of just try to keep maintaining it as it is. But I do see the need more and more for folks to be able to access it on mobile devices and iPads and that sort of thing. So I think I would start with ArcGIS Online and see how far I could get without having to do too much heavy coding. Who maintains the data sets? The Bureau of Aquaculture maintains the data sets, not clear. I just basically put whatever I'm told or given to put in the atlas. So I add layers to the atlas, but I don't maintain the data sets.
And because we link directly to those layers, as soon as they're updated, that's what you see. So we're not updating anything in-house. As soon as the town or the Bureau of Aquaculture update the data, then it's present on site.
Yes. What % of new shellfish leases have used this atlas for their application? Do you have any sense of that?
That's a good question. I don't have a percentage, but I would say that of those that come in, I would probably say 3 out of the last 5 that I've seen have used the atlas or Google Maps. Again, with they're a little bit different in terms of their features, but the maps are much improved over those that are hand-drawn or those that are trying to use different data sets in some other computer setting. But we don't have scores of applications that are coming in each year. And we do have a state permitting work group in Connecticut, and so we just implemented a new tracking process, so we will have more concrete numbers probably by the end of this year.
So we had some data questions coming in. One that says, is there any chance the eelgrass data set will be updated beyond 2012? I do think so. That data set is maintained by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have pretty scheduled, I think, updates to it. Tessa, do you have any sense of if that's a 2014 or 2015 project?
So typically that happens every 2 years, and then there's some ground truthing of the data, which usually takes an additional maybe a year or more, but we'd have to look into that to see when the next data set would be available.
Okay. We could certainly find out for you, so follow up with us. Are there any plans to include nutrient phytoplankton data in the atlas? This is so important to shellfish growers.
Absolutely. So that's something that we have talked to Charlie Yerish about as well, because he's interested in that sort of information for seaweed aquaculture, and he has access to some of that data. So when we can get our hands on local data, then we will be posting it.
And Tessa, what other states are using similar online mapping tools that you're familiar with?
So there are a number of states. Maine, Massachusetts, New York has a great tool. Maryland has a great tool on the East Coast. Those are the ones that I'm familiar with. But a lot of states are moving in that direction. It really depends on what group is managing the data set, and so what the functionality is for those different tools. So some are just basically presenting the different data sets that you can view and overlay, and some have more sophisticated tools like we do, so that you can choose or draw your own lease, or again add or export different GIS data into the program.
And do you foresee having to update this version of the mapper within the next few years? Yes, we are always updating the mapper. It's a constant process of updating any online web tool, I think. But the data obviously gets updated. The tools sometimes need to be updated, and also, you know, we get requests for new tools. So if it's easy enough, it's something we can add without having to get a major funding source to do it. We certainly take that into consideration. But as it is, the version, it's not going to go backwards. It will be maintained. And like I mentioned, it would be nice to have the opportunity to sort of explore some different technologies to make it more functional on different types of devices too, if that's a possibility.
We've been quite fortunate in Connecticut that we have Cary and other staff at the Center for Land Use Education and Research who have been on hand to help us with updates to the platform and developing new tools. That doesn't occur in every state. They have funding for other tasks and sort of make do to help us out. So we're actively seeking funds so that we can do more substantial updates to the system. You know, the tweaking when the server goes down, or you know, something's missing or not working well. Those are sort of easy to catch Cary and to have her make those quick fixes. But the upgrades require a substantial amount of time.
Okay, well, not seeing anything. I guess we're pretty much set here, but you have our email addresses. They're up there on the screen. So please reach out to us if you have any specific questions. If you have technical questions about how the mapper was created, or even some data questions, you can send those to me. Tessa, she's the aquaculture person, so she's on top of all that stuff. Send them her way. But you can always either email either of us, and we can pass it along if it's not, you know, in our area of expertise.
And we should also thank Kristen DeRoja-Bannock from the Bureau of Aquaculture, who's developed a lot of the state shellfish data sets. And so if you have any specific questions or modifications on those, then you should contact Kristen, and we will also have her information up on the website as well.
True. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon.